Hi, and welcome back to AI News that you should know about for the week of April 3rd. I'm your host, Ashley Coffey.
And I'm Daniel Hill. If you're new to the show, every week we consolidate the top AI headlines into 15 minutes. This week, we'll be talking about Anthropic's leaked Claude code, where they gave the full source code. We'll also talk about OpenAI closing on a record $122 billion of funding. We'll talk about Stanford's study outlining the dangers of asking AI chatbots for personal advice, and a new survey from Pew Research where 1,400 Americans were surveyed. More than three-quarters said they don't trust AI, and 15% said they'd be willing to work for an AI boss.
We'll be covering all of that on our show today. But first, here's a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back. Let's dive in. All right, so Anthropic accidentally leaked Claude code's full source code, triggering over 8,000 GitHub takedowns in 48 hours. This is coming from TechCrunch. Actually, everything today is coming from TechCrunch, so let's dive into it. I wanted to pull this one because the headline is important, but the cause and effect is even more important to know here. So, long story short, Anthropic took down thousands of GitHub repos trying to yank its leaked source code, a move the company says was an accident. And with this thing happening, Anthropic accidentally caused thousands of code repositories on GitHub to be taken down while trying to pull copies of its most popular product source code. So what happened is, by trying to clean up an accident, they took down a lot of innocent GitHub repositories, angering a lot of people. But what happened is Anthropic issued a takedown notice under the U.S. digital copyright law, asking GitHub to take down repositories. If you're not familiar with GitHub, it's a repo, a repository library where you can share code back and forth, you can collaborate. But according to GitHub's records, the notice was executed against some 8,100 repositories, including legitimate forks of Anthropic's own publicly released Claude code. And this created irate social media users whose code got blocked. And they said Anthropic's head of Claude code, Boris Cherny, said the move was accidental and retracted the bulk of takedown notices, limiting it to one repository and 96 forks with the accidental released source codes. So this botched cleanup is another black eye for the company as it reportedly plans for IPO, a task which typically demands attention to execution and compliance. And leaking your source code as a company isn't a really good thing to do. So you better believe there's a shareholder lawsuit coming. So we'll keep you updated on that. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
Tough month for Anthropic, between the United States government really giving them a hard time, and now this. You have to feel bad for the Anthropic team, who seems like they're working 24/7 and just running into roadblocks and situations on everything that they do at this point.
Yeah, it's one day it's one thing, next day it's another thing. It's back and forth. So next up, this is a kind of other end of the spectrum. OpenAI closed a record $122 billion funding round, becoming the most valuable private company ever at an $852 billion valuation. That's wild. So its largest funding round to date, and it's expected to hit the public markets later this year. And this round will add to OpenAI's huge purse of money, as it spends enormous amount of that money on AI chips, data center build-outs, and hiring top talent. About $3 billion of that investment came from individual investors and bank channels. And it's exceedingly interesting to see the moves that OpenAI makes and its back and forth of, are we a private company? Are we going public? It's tomato, tomato. What are your thoughts, Daniel?
This article that you linked to has a section that says that OpenAI is claiming they're generating $2 billion in revenue per month. Now, I don't want to say whether I think that's possible or not, but what's interesting to me is you are having $2 billion in revenue per month, but you needed to borrow another $122 billion. That's a huge amount of money. And if you are thinking at all about the landscape, OpenAI is not the only AI company Google's Gemini has come so far. We just talked about Anthropic and their Claude product and how that is gaining popularity. So the competition is really fierce. And it seems like, okay, if you are generating $2 billion per month of revenue now, that's great. But how long are you going to keep that number going? And what is your plan to make that number bigger to repay the $122 billion that you're borrowing? And I think the answer there is IPO, right? And that's how I am imagining that the team is thinking of.
Yep, absolutely. We see it every week in some of the headlines that we cover, especially with OpenAI axing their Sora app as they focus on their bread and butter. So we'll pay attention to this and see what happens and report back to you. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be talking about Stanford's study outlines the dangers of asking AI chatbots for personal advice. And 1,400 Americans surveyed, more than three-quarters said they don't trust AI.
Welcome back. Continuing with our stories. A new Stanford study is outlining the dangers of asking AI chatbots for personal advice. A bit of background: people use AI to give them advice in relationships, to write personal text messages or emails to close friends and family, and leveraging AI's ability to do that. Before I get into the news here, the article from TechCrunch uses the term sycophant, which is not a word that I'm familiar with. It uses the term sycophantic. I looked it up. It is one who uses compliments to gain self-serving favor or advantage from another. So in English, you might say they're buttering them up, they're flattering them in order to achieve a specific outcome. Okay, let's get into the news. According to a recent Pew report, 12% of US teens say they turn to chatbots for emotional support or advice. Interestingly, the study's lead author, who is a PhD candidate, told the Stanford report that she heard undergraduates asking chatbots for relationship advice and even to draft breakup texts. And here's the quote from this PhD candidate. She said, quote, "By default, AI advice does not tell people that they're wrong, nor give them tough love. I worry that people will lose the skills to deal with difficult social situations," end quote. This is a really interesting article because it points out the way AI talks to us when we use it is that it's encouraging, it's positive, it flatters us, but that is not the best way to not only communicate, but also to help people accomplish tasks. Is encouragement good? Of course. But to the point where it starts to become detrimental, and especially when people are using it for relationship advice, doing things like drafting text to family and friends, instead of engaging a qualified professional if true mental health is needed, this is where it's a problem. I don't think I'm going to do this article justice in the short amount of time that we just do to cover these. So definitely go back and read these. But one of the things that the article points out is that AI companies are incentivized to increase the AI flattering you, not to reduce it, because the more that you interact with it, the better it is for the AI company. Ashley, what's your take on that?
I'm so glad you pulled this one, Daniel. I think my take is, why are we asking something that's not having a lived experience of as a person for personal advice? That is just the net there. It doesn't have human experience. So how is it going to know how to draft a breakup text? Come on, guys. This is all like social, emotional things that are really complicated and layered. And AI is just not going to do it. I think it's more about we're pushing the mental load of making these decisions onto something else to do it, which is dangerous. I made the decision a long time ago to never do this, to never ask my chatbot for personal advice, because that's something as a human, like, there's a lot of context and personal experience that you can't take into account when you're asking for personal advice. So unless there's a copy of me in my AI, there's no way that, yeah. So I'm glad you pulled this one. I encourage everyone to read it.
Yeah, I think that we use the term artificial intelligence and we throw it around as if there is actual intelligence. But again, these are just large language models, right? They're just determining what the next most likely word is in the sentence based on all the information that it's gathered. And it is designed to keep you happy and keep using the product, not to call out your bad behavior. Because if it calls out your bad behavior, you might use it less. Let's be realistic there. So this is really a great article. You can find the link to it in the show notes. Let's move on to our last article. It's a combination of two TechCrunch articles about the same survey. I'll get into it. So, background, companies have been saying they're all in on AI, and that gives the impression that AI is fully trustworthy. It's always giving correct information in professional settings, which, let's be honest, we know it doesn't. A small population of people also prefer interacting with AI instead of interacting with humans. And that's something we've seen over the past couple of years. Here's the news. As AI use and adoption rises, Americans continue to lack trust in the tool based on a new Quinnipiac University poll that was published Monday. 1,500 Americans were surveyed. More than three-quarters said they don't trust AI. 76% said they trust it rarely or only sometimes, compared to 21% who trust it almost all of the time. There's a really interesting contrast here between the use of AI and how much you trust it, right? 51% of people said they use AI for research, and some use it for work, data analysis, writing, whatever. But when only 21% trust AI-generated information most or all of the time, it points out Americans are adopting AI, but doing it with deep hesitation, not deep trust. And I think that's really an interesting thought on it. The other part of this survey that they did, the other part of the poll, is that 15% of Americans say they'd be willing to have a job where their direct supervisor was an AI program that assigned tasks and set schedules. I don't want to go any further, Ashley, without getting your take. What are your thoughts on these two articles and one survey?
Yeah, it's interesting. Finally, we're seeing data, which I appreciate, to back up some of these discussions. So I think it's natural for us to have trust and hesitation to something that we don't know. It's human nature to fear something. Yeah, we don't know. And one could say the same about the trust with a car when it replaced the horse. Similar concept. And it's understandable. I mean, we're just like we talked about earlier with OpenAI and Anthropic, back and forth with funding and investors and shareholders. At the end of the day, what is it benefiting? And if it's not benefiting like efficiency and processes and automation, then it's only benefiting a company for monetary. It's money at the end of the day. So there's a slippery slope there whenever you're relying on it for like personal things, because not all language learning models are created equal. I mean, Llama, a lot of the stuff that's used in Llama is created for engagement rather than like contextual, useful information. It's just there. How long can we keep you engaged here? And I don't like that. I want something to disagree with me. I want it to give me a different point of view. I want it to tell me when I'm wrong. I think it's a really
Challenge your
dangerous
beliefs,
thing.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so dangerous to have tools that agree with us all the time. And we're seeing that reflected in social media, people thinking they're super smart all of a sudden after digesting one thing. The Dunning-Kruger effect is at an all-time high.
Actually was thinking about the people preferring an AI boss or manager to a human manager, and in what scenarios that does kind of make sense. And I thought about the times where I've had a boss who's just really not an encouraging mentor, just, riding you, micromanaging you. And you think to yourself, an AI would probably do a better job than this kind of manager. So there are some scenarios where I do think that makes sense. However, if you have a human manager who's encouraging, who knows your strengths, who wants to see you succeed and grow in your responsibilities and take on additional tasks to earn more revenue, I 100% think a human boss is much better than an AI in that instance. But not everyone has that kind of experience. So that's another take from this article that I think is important.
I agree. I think it'd be if it's binary, right? If it's the boss is there and there's less subjectivity, less nepotism, less biasness, and I'm only making decisions on like, do this task, show up at this time. Like, I love that. I feel like that builds cadence and understanding. But it's like all the nuanced details that make things complicated, whether it's nepotism or biasness or whatever it is, that really gets in the way of good leadership sometimes. So I can see why 15% of people would be willing to have an AI boss.
Yeah. And some people might want a boss who is not influenced by emotion, right? They want a calm,
Exactly.
even-keeled manager who's always going to be consistent. And that's going to be an AI, right? So that's another reason. That is it for our AI news that you should know about this week. You can find links to everything we've discussed in the show notes. And find us on social media. We'd love to hear what you think of the show and how we can improve it. You can find me at Daniel Hill Media on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube.
And thank you, our listeners, for listening to today's episode. If you want more tech talk, you can find me on Instagram at AshleyRCoffee89, where you can sign up for my weekly AI updates newsletter at the link in my bio. Each week, you get an easy-to-digest overview of the top AI headlines, efficiency prompts, to help you save time and tech tips for getting the most out of your tech tools.
Thank you for listening, and come back next week for more AI news you should know about.